So I'm Alex Jaimes, and I am the CTO and Chief Scientist at AICure. And I'm actually new to healthcare. I've been with AICure for about 6 months. Before that, I spent time mainly at large companies doing a lot of data mining, computer vision, and the most recently I was Director of Research at Yahoo, where I led efforts in computer vision across multiple products. So I'm going to talk about what we're doing at AICure, and the first question that I have for all of you is whether you have always taken your medication as prescribed. If you always have, raise your hand. I see like 4 people. That's great. That's much better than average. I don't know if I believe you completely, but let's say that I do. And do you know anyone who has suffered from serious illness? I think pretty much everybody, or know somebody. So given these 2 points, I think the technology that I'm going to describe will impact you and everyone else. And I was really happy to have Jackie's talk right before mine, because it kind of gives us a full overview of the chain, from drug discovery to clinical trials and sort of what happens next. So what I'm going to talk about is adherence. And adherence basically refers to taking the medication that you're supposed to at the right time and in the right way. Why does it matter, and what spaces does it matter? It basically matters in 2 spaces. One is clinical trials, and the second one is population health. And it matters for different reasons. In clinical trials, as we saw in the previous presentation, basically, there's a lot of research invested in creating new drugs for conditions, and then they get to the stage where they're tested on humans. The problem is when these medications are being tested on humans, if people don't take the medication or the drug that's being developed, then there's no way to know whether they work or not. So adherence is really, really critical. And if people say they're taking the drug and they're not during the clinical trial, it basically means that either the trials fail or the drugs pass to the next phase, even though they're not effective, or they're unsafe and it's later discovered they're unsafe, and this leads to higher costs, which are eventually passed on to consumers. In population health, as general population, taking the medication as prescribed matters, because then if people don't take the medication, then their health outcomes don't improve, and that again leads to higher costs. So it's really a chain where poor medication adherence leads to poor health outcomes, increased service utilization. So, if you go to the doctor, they tell you to take this and you don't take it, chances are you have to go back. And then the doctor will say, well, did you take your medication? And you will say, of course I did. I took all of it, but you didn't take it, right? So then, poor service leads to higher costs, and again, passed on to the patient. So it's a chain. So it's really, really critical. And healthcare, is huge. And we heard a little bit earlier today about the costs in healthcare. And if we look at the US alone, it's about $2.7 trillion. That's about 18% of the GDP. Clinical trials alone is really, really big. It's about a $50 billion a year industry. And the costs of not adherence, meaning people don't take their medication the way they're supposed to, are estimated between $100 and $300 billion in the US alone. And that's 3 to 10% of total US healthcare costs. But it's not only about money, it's about health and well-being. And so if we look at that, failing to follow prescriptions leads to about 125,000 deaths per year and up to 10% of all hospitalizations. That's only in the US. So for everyone here, take your medication the way it's prescribed. It's important. But it goes beyond that, right? Because as I said before, if you're doing clinical trials and you don't take the medication properly, then those medications that go to the market may be delayed or may not go to market when they're supposed to. So who benefits from taking the medication at the right time and the way they're supposed to? Well, first of all, patients, right? Because they're the ones that have whatever condition it is. Second, the doctors, and increasingly in many countries, doctors are being rated on outcomes. And I think that's the model that we're going to get to. So insurance companies will pay doctors only if they manage to cure or to get patients to get better in whatever condition they're treating. Insurance companies benefit because if you're the insurance company paying for medication and the patient is not taking it, and if it's a serious condition, then that patient is going to end up in the hospital, and that's going to be a lot more expensive than paying for the medication. So the insurance company wants you to take the medication. And then obviously the pharmaceutical company wants you to take the medication because if you don't take the medication that's prescribed, then you don't buy more medication. So it's a good deal for them as well. Governments are very interested, and there are many use cases in government applications of adherence. And I'll give you some examples. One of them is tuberculosis. In the US, and I'm not sure about other countries, but if you have tuberculosis, by law, you have to go to a medical center and take the medication. And if you don't, the police will come and arrest you and take you to jail and make you take the medication because it's a public health risk, right? So it's really critical that you take the medication. If you're HIV positive and you don't take your medication, your chances of infecting other people are much higher. So the government wants you to take your medication because that lowers costs overall. And there are many of these. So it's one of those things in healthcare that really impacts everyone in a positive way. And it's kind of unique in that sense. But how bad are we at taking our medication the way that it's prescribed? Again, we can break it up into two areas. And these are estimates based on scientific studies. So in clinical trials, they vary between 43 and 78%, which is crazy, right? We're talking about deep learning and machine learning. And we're basically saying that experiments are being done on developing drugs and medications that go out in the market, and that in between 43 and 78% of the cases, we don't know if people actually took the medication. So the data is very, very noisy. And so it's a bit disturbing, right? And in population health, it's estimated that approximately half of patients don't take the medications as prescribed. So it's a really, really important problem at many levels. So next I'll do the video. Can you play it, please? It has sound. Great.
For millions of patients, taking medication is vital to staying healthy. Yet half of all patients do not take their medication as prescribed. At AI Cure, we use artificial intelligence on smartphones to visually confirm medication ingestion. We make sure that the right patient is taking the right medication at the right time. Biopharmaceutical companies, providers, and payers benefit from new efficiencies and higher quality data, allowing them to focus on those patients at highest risk of poor adherence or hospitalization. By leveraging intelligent technology on devices that people already have, AI Cure has developed a powerful, accurate, and scalable adherence tool. The interactive technology can be downloaded as an app onto any mobile device and is designed to adapt to patient behavior over time. The platform can be customized according to disease type, patient demographics, and risk factors. Improper use or suspicious activity triggers real-time intervention. The process is entirely software-based, no widgets, no custom hardware, and no change to the manufacturing process. With a portfolio of intellectual property and multiple innovation awards, AI Cure is transforming clinical research and the delivery of care on a global scale.
Okay, we can stop the video. So
AI Cure, connecting the world's patients to better treatment.
And switch back to the PowerPoint. So I'm going to talk about what we're doing, the platform, and I think a lot of the things that I will say about it are applicable to many, many areas in healthcare where a similar platform can be developed and deployed. So why smartphones? I mean, as of last year, there were about 2.6 billion smartphones. It's estimated by 2020 there will be 6.1 billion smartphones. The platform that I'm going to describe works on phones that cost $10. And it's been said before, and probably you've heard this as well, the technology that's in your average smartphone is more powerful than what was used to send the man to the moon. So we have a huge opportunity with smartphone technology to make a lot of changes in healthcare, and specifically in adherence. So I'll talk about how it works and say a little bit about some of the use cases and deployments that we've had and the challenges around that and how we use machine learning. So as the video said, it's assistive, it's interactive, it's personalized, it's really easy to use, and that's one of the benefits. people are really used to the phones. And if I ask most of you, especially those that are local, what's the most valuable thing you could lose today? You would probably say your phone, right? If you're traveling, you lose your passport, that's a bit more complex. But in general, if you lose your phone, that's like, disaster breaks, right? It's a big deal. So we have a really strong relationship with our phones. And that's really critical in leveraging the technology. So the way that the platform works is, the patient gets a reminder, just like any reminder, they tap on start the app, and then the camera starts running, as you saw in the video. They hold up the pill, if it's an oral medication, and then they take it. So what the app is doing is guiding the user in terms of, where to hold the pill, hold up the phone, and so on and so forth, and making sure that the person is taking the medication. So it automatically recognizes the pill to make sure that it's the right one. It recognizes the face to make sure it's the right person taking the medication. And it recognizes the action of taking the medication. And then, since we're using smartphones, the data on whether the person took the medication or not, or whether there was a problem in the person taking the medication, is automatically sent to a dashboard, where if it's a site running a clinical trial, or if it's a doctor or a clinic with patients in the general population, can see who has taken the medication, who hasn't, and if a particular patient or participant in a trial has not taken it, or is not taking it, or is having trouble, they can click a button to contact them and send an SMS, or call them and say, it looks like you're having trouble with your medication, what's going on, do you need any help, what is the problem? So it's more than just a phone. It becomes really a platform that gives this level of interaction, attention, and that's really critical because the people using it feel like they're getting another level of attention. So that's one of the things that phones give us, right? They give us this opportunity to connect with many patients at once and to intervene if a clinical trial is being run and make changes in the way that the trial is running to make sure that it works. But it also has a surveillance component. I don't like that word too much, but in some cases it does make sense. And more specifically in clinical trials, it makes sense to know whether people are taking the medication or not. It's really, really, really important because every time a drug is tested in a clinical trial, once it passes, it means everyone, whoever takes that medication, is going to be impacted by the results of that trial. So if I'm participating in a trial and I don't take the medication and I say, yeah, this made me feel so much better, or I don't report side effects, and that gets to market, then those results will be seen later on. So making sure that we identify fraud is really important, specifically in that use case. So the main features, and I think, again, I want to point this out as an example of opportunity that we have in healthcare and using mobile devices. But it's highly scalable, right? It's in the App Store, it's in Google Play, so it can be downloaded by millions of people now if we had that business model where anyone can just download it. It's inexpensive, interactive, it can be adaptive and personalized, which is, again, one of the beauties of having this kind of thing. Any language, sensitive language and computer literacy level, real-time interventions because data is sent immediately, so the site or the clinic can call the patient or send an SMS. Once we start collecting a lot of the data for specific therapeutic areas, we get insights into how people in those areas behave, how they take their medication, what kinds of problems they have. And that's really, really interesting. And then there's all of the regulations around that, HIPAA compliance, and so on and so forth. So where's machine learning used? It's really used across the platform. And again, I think it's an interesting example because it shows us the opportunities that we have in leveraging this kind of technology. So why would you need face recognition? And I'll give you an example later on, but in clinical trials, there's such a thing as professional patients. So in clinical trials, people get paid to be in the trial, and there are people that are enrolled in multiple trials at once just to get paid, and they don't take the medication. So one way to avoid that is by having this sort of system where we can pick up and say, well, wait a minute, this person is already enrolled in another trial, and so they can't be in two trials at the same time. So that's critical. Identifying the medication, again, if it's a clinical trial, you want to make sure it's the right one. If it's in population health, people sometimes might make mistakes and try to take the wrong medication, right? confirming ingestion, and so on and so forth. It's fully automatic, so all the processing is done on the phone itself. There's no manual review, and there's real-time analytics going on, and so on and so forth. So fraud detection, I briefly mentioned that, and just highlight some of the mechanisms that are used. But what I want to highlight here, and that's critical, is that it's not a single instance that really determines whether somebody's trying to cheat or not. It's behavior over time, right? And a lot of it has to do with the psychology of cheating. So the app, for example, will not tell you if it's cheating. It won't say, hey, you're cheating. I know that's not the right medication. Because if it does, then the person will get better at cheating and will start trying to find ways around it, right? So what it will do is send an alarm, and then based on analyzing data over time and behavioral patterns, flags will be raised, and then the site, if it's a clinical trial, can decide what the intervention mechanism will be, and then maybe somebody will call the patient and say, it looks like you're having trouble, what's the trouble? A bit of like a poke kind of thing. So more than the individual event, it's behavior over time that's critical. So the kinds of things we measure. So in general, when you're doing a clinical trial, the standard thing is to use blood tests, and they're done once every 2 weeks or 3 weeks or whatever frequency. And the reason is it's expensive, it's complicated, people have to come to the clinic to do it. And so with this technology, we have continuous recording of whether people are taking the medication or not. And as I said earlier, one of the problems in a clinical trial is if some people are not taking the medication, then you need to find more people, add people to the trial. This delays the trial. If the drug is effective, it'll take longer because you have to start changing. And the later you find out they're not taking it, because you find that from the blood samples, then the longer it takes. And because of the cost involved in research and so on and so forth, it's estimated that on average, a single day of delay costs the pharmaceutical industry $1 million because of patent life and so on and so forth. So understanding when to intervene and replace a participant is really, really critical. The standard alternatives to measure whether people are taking medication include blister packs, where they just count how many pills, blood tests, and then direct observation, which is typically phase 1, where you have a nurse watching somebody do it. So when we look at behavior, we've done a ton of deployments in multiple therapeutic areas and with different types of clients and partners. And these are some of the areas in which we've done deployments. One of the interesting things is that if you just look at adherence the way that you would by using blister packs or other techniques, they don't really give you information on individual behavior, and that's really critical, knowing that people can be really adherent to taking their medication, but there can be wide variations in how they take it. So there's an opportunity in terms of big data insights. Behavioral patterns over time are really interesting as well, and we've noticed that typically those are consistent. So if people start doing well at the beginning, they typically continue to do well. We can analyze things like time on task, and this is for schizophrenics and ADHD conditions. Typical time is around 1 minute, so it's not a lot slower than just taking the medication. And in studies that we've done, we found that using the app itself increases adherence, and the dropout rates are a lot lower than without the app. And we think that one of the reasons is, again, this relationship with the phone. So the act of doing it somehow creates some accountability or responsibility or whatever you want to call it that increases in people actually using it. In terms of perception and usability, we do a lot of work, and I think that's one of the key challenges. And I liked what David said about BioBeats and spending a lot of efforts on usability and design. It's really critical. So we do this as well, and we found that depending on therapeutic area, sometimes there are areas in which there are severe cognitive disabilities or impairments, and so understanding how they behave and how they perceive things is really important. So just some data on that. In general, we find that people like using this kind of technology across different, very, very different therapeutic areas like opioid replacement therapy and schizophrenia. Older population, that's one of the questions that typically, people ask us, well, what, my grandmother would not be able to use this. And it's funny, my dad, he uses his phone a lot. He's almost like a teenager. He's constantly on his phone. I'm talking to him like, Dad, you're not listening. So we have misconception about older people using phones, and I think that's also changing significantly. In our own studies, we found stroke in particular, that people really, really like the app. And in this particular case, it was a clinical trial. They ended the treatment and came back for a second part of the treatment, and some of them refused to be in the trial unless they had the app. So it's amazing. And I think one of the reasons is also the fact that they feel more connected to the clinic, so they're getting better service. We did a very recent study, which I think was fascinating, and we just submitted it for publication, where we brought in some people, not real patients, just to try out the device and the app with some different design decisions that we made. And we wanted to see whether they understood how the technology worked and if it had any impact on usability. And we found that a lot of people, surprisingly, these people in New York City, in their 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, and 60s, many of them didn't understand that it was the camera that was recognizing the pill in the face. And so to us, that was a big surprise. But then we thought about it, and we're like, well, actually, the phone has a bunch of sensors, as we've seen from previous talks, right? You can pay with the phone by just touching. You have you can use your thumb to open the phone. So some of the people believe that there were special sensors on the phone that were not the camera. And this did not affect usability at all. So just some food for thought. This I mentioned before about patients that enroll in multiple trials, and our ability to catch them is really, really critical. And these are just some examples of the things that we do in the app to try to detect these cheating or abnormal behaviors and challenges now. And with this, I'll close since I'm running out of time, although I'm the host, so I can stay as long as I want. So on the mobile device, the computer vision component, it's all based on machine learning, so we have to train for the pills and so on and so forth. So there are a lot of technical challenges that are really fascinating. With audio, we use the audio to detect spitting and some other abnormal behaviors. Interaction is a really, really big deal, again, because with this kind of technology, you can deploy clinical trials that are really, really large scale. So we can do trials with thousands of people and stratify the population. This is related to the question that Brendan asked earlier, which is really amazing, because then you can really personalize medicine, right? So being able to use this in multiple languages, multiple cultural contexts is critical. The motivation part is important. Gamification, incentives, showing progress as if the treatment has a specific window. So this is a lot of the work that we do. And then for the dashboards, it's more like, then we're looking at big data analytics and being able to provide insights that are actionable, that are interesting, and that are useful, and that are predictive, whether it's population health or clinical trials. So most of the work is really, and that's the thing that's fascinating about healthcare, and I think in general, it really is at the intersection of user experience, big data, and what I just call human aspects. And machine learning and deep learning is really right at that center. And we need to understand users and the data really, really, really well. And to do that, I think as part of the innovation cycle, we have to be really focused on the user, whether it's the user of the app, a patient, or it's a doctor, or whoever it is, to understand that and kind of, circle continuously in a process that I call the innovation cycle that starts either with data analysis, hypotheses, or design, and just goes around and around. And every time you do that, you go deeper and deeper and deeper, and you don't innovate until you get to the point where you really understand the user within a context. And so one of the fascinating things, and this is sort of a typical meeting that we have in some of our projects, where we have people with very different backgrounds. So experience design, economics, machine learning, statistics, computer science, ethnography, psychology, psychiatry. It's really quite fascinating. So finally, to close, what we're really aiming for is an intelligent medical assistant. So it's not a surveillance app. We don't view it that way. It's more like an assistant and somebody that helps people stay on their medication regimen. And the idea is that at some point very soon, when you open the app, it won't just, switch on the camera, but there will be a character that says, "Hey, Alex, how are you doing? How are you feeling today? Have you taken your medication yet? How do you feel?" And so on and so forth. And so finally, to close, about the company, we're a little more than 5 years old. And so that's another one of the challenges that's interesting in healthcare, that to get to the stage where you can deploy, which is what we're doing now, and in scale, there's a lot of work that needs to be done in terms of understanding regulation and privacy and all of that. And so we've done all of that stuff. And I think with that, I'd like to close and open for questions. Thank you.